It was the 8th of August, 1942. The world was on fire. In the West, empires were bleeding. In the East, the shadow of a new tyranny was lengthening towards India's borders. And in the center of this inferno stood a man who had spent his life teaching the world the power of turning the other cheek. Yet on this day, he was not asking for a cheek to be turned. He was not asking for prayer, for patience, for a negotiated settlement. He was asking for an end. Immediately. Here was the supreme irony. The world's greatest practitioner of non-violence was about to issue an ultimatum that sounded like a declaration of war. A frail man of 69, whose weapon was fasting, and whose armor was truth, was demanding that the mightiest empire on earth vacate its most prized possession. Now, the contradiction burned at the heart of the moment. How could a man who would not hurt a fly, who had written letters of brotherhood to Adolf Hitler, now stand before his countrymen and speak of ultimatums? How could a man who preached love wield a word like anarchy as a threat? Because he had realized a deeper truth, that the greatest violence is the silence of the oppressed, that the most insidious form of brutality is the slow, polite strangulation of a people's spirit. In March of that year, the British had sent Sir Stafford Cripps with a proposal. It was a document full of promises for a distant, uncertain future. Gandhi had looked at it and saw only the same old empire wrapped in new paper. He dismissed it with a contempt that shocked even his closest allies. Leave India to God. If this is too much, then leave her to anarchy. By August, the patience had evaporated. The political water was boiling. The Congress Working Committee had already approved a resolution that stunned the British into disbelief. The immediate ending of British rule was an urgent necessity. Now Gandhi had one more task. He had to forge this political decision into a spiritual and moral fire that could consume the chains of 200 years. He had to find a language that would turn passive acceptance into active defiance without descending into the bloody chaos of a violent revolution. He had to find the magic word. And that word would become the most explosive slogan in the history of colonial resistance. Quit India. The 24 hours before the speech were not filled with heroic calm. They were filled with the grinding, anxious weight of history. Winston Churchill, the British bulldog, had already made his contempt clear. The Viceroy, Lord Linlithgow, was preparing a swift and devastating blow. The plan was already in motion. Arrest the leadership, crush the rebellion before it could begin. Gandhi was not naive. He was staying at Birla House in Bombay. The monsoon rain lashed against the windows, a fitting mirror for the tempest inside him. There was a gathering dread in the air. He knew the British did not negotiate under threat. He knew they would not simply pack their bags and leave because an old man in a loincloth asked them to. He knew he was painting a target on his own back, but he also knew something else. He had looked into the eyes of the voiceless millions. He had traversed India as nobody in the modern age had. He had seen their trust, their desperate hope, their numbing apathy. He felt the weight of that trust like a physical pressure on his chest. The advisors argued. Pages were crossed out. The question of the slogan, the spark that would ignite the nation, was debated. One advisor suggested get out. Gandhi rejected it as impolite. Another suggested retreat or withdraw. That too felt weak. It was Yusuf Meher Ali who presented Gandhi with the words, "Quit India." Gandhi looked at them, felt the weight of the phrase, and accepted it. The moment of crisis was not just a political collision. It was a personal crisis of conscience. Gandhi was a man who had built his life on the principle of ahimsa, non-violence, which he considered the purest form of love. Now he was about to deploy that love as a weapon of mass disruption. If his call for do or die was misinterpreted as a call for violence, if the crowds turned to rage and bloodshed, his entire life's work would be rendered meaningless. This fear was not abstract. He was all too aware of his own fragility. Earlier that year, the death of his beloved secretary Mahadev Desai had left a void. He was aging, his health faltering, yet he had never felt more certain. If in the present crisis, he confessed to the crowd, when the earth is being scorched by the flames of himsa and crying for deliverance, I failed to make use of the God-given talent. God will not forgive me. He stood at the precipice. He was not a conqueror about to seize power. He was a humble servant about to issue a challenge to the very soul of the world. The pressure was not just the threat of prison or death. The pressure was the terror of failing the 40 crore souls who were looking to him for deliverance. As his voice rose at the Gwalior Tank Maidan, later to be renamed August Kranti, Maidan, it wasn't the roar of a general, but the steady, unwavering tone of a man who had made peace with the end of his own life. He began with a confession. He asked the crowd to consider the resolution from his point of view. He knew many were asking if he had changed, if the old Gandhi of 1920 was still there. Let me, he said, hasten to assure you that I am the same Gandhi as I was in 1920. I have not changed in any fundamental respect. I attach the same importance to non-violence that I did then. If at all, my emphasis on it has grown stronger. But then he pivoted. He acknowledged the conflagration which is enveloping the whole world. The context had changed. The world was in flames, and inaction had become a sin. He was not abandoning non-violence, he was weaponizing it. He was transforming it from a personal discipline into a national insurrection. Fraud and untruth today are stalking the world, he declared. I cannot be a helpless witness to such a situation. He was drawing a line in the sand. The old Gandhi was still there, but the old tactics were dead. It was no longer about slow reform or constitutional dialogue. It was about a psychological break. He didn't just ask them to fight. He asked them to change their minds. He rejected any notion of bargaining. I am not going to strike a bargain with the Viceroy for ministries and the like. I am not going to be satisfied with anything short of complete freedom. And then came the climax. The moment where the pacifist issued the ultimatum. The moment that would define the movement and haunt the empire. He reached into his heart and pulled out the slogan, a phrase that had once glorified British soldiers in the Crimean War, repurposed by an Indian saint to dismantle the British Empire. He stripped it of its military violence and infused it with the sacrificial spirit of satyagraha, truth force. Here is a mantra, a short one, that I give you, he said. You may imprint it on your hearts and let every breath of yours give expression to it. The mantra is, do or die. We shall either free India or die in the attempt. We shall not live to see the perpetuation of our slavery. Do or die. Karenge ya marenge. It was not a threat to the British. It was a covenant with the Indian soul. He was declaring that they would rather perish than live as slaves. He was taking the chains off their psyche. He concluded with a vision. This was not a struggle for power, he insisted. It was a struggle for a truly democratic ideal. Everybody will be his own master. It is to join a struggle for such democracy that I invite you today. Once you realize this, you will forget the differences between the Hindus and Muslims, and think of yourselves as Indians only, engaged in the common struggle for independence. The crowd erupted. The resolution was passed. The die was cast. The empire had been given notice. Within 24 hours, the voice was silenced. At 5 a.m. on August 9th, 1942, Gandhi was woken in his bed at Birla House. 3 police cars arrived. He asked for his prayers, and then he was taken into custody. Nehru, Patel, Azad. The entire Congress leadership was swept into prison. The government believed they had severed the head of the snake, but Gandhi's words were already loose in the world. They had not been heard as a call to arms, but as a permission slip to be free. The British had arrested the man, but they could not arrest the message. It spread like wildfire, through newspapers hastily printed, through handwritten leaflets, through word of mouth. In the villages and towns, the message was clear. Think of yourselves as Indians only. The psychological break had been achieved. The response shook the British administration to its core. In the absence of the leaders, the rage was unfiltered. Railway stations were attacked. Telegraph offices were destroyed. Government buildings were set ablaze. It was not the non-violent dream Gandhi had envisioned, but it was a revolution nonetheless. The streets became ungovernable. The British responded with unprecedented repression. Over 100,000 people were arrested. Public floggings were common. Hundreds were killed in police and army shootings. The British were so panicked that they set aside a battleship specifically to take Gandhi and the leaders out of India, fearing that if they killed him, they would ignite a fire that would consume them entirely. For over 3 years, the Congress leadership languished in jail. But the impact of the speech had already done its work. It had transformed the narrative. The British were no longer seen as a legitimate government. They were occupiers, holding on by force. The moral authority that sustained the Raj was shattered. In the dusty lanes of India, the do-or-die spirit proved that an empire could not govern a nation that had collectively decided to stop obeying. The British had won the battles, but they had lost the war for the hearts and minds. By 1947, the British Empire, exhausted by war and unable to stem the tide of revolt, left. The Quit India speech had created a wave that swept them away. It wasn't the bullets of a rebel army that forced them out. It was the quiet, unfinished revolution of a people who had decided they would rather die than be slaves. History endures because people choose to remember. Subscribe for more timeless speeches and great oratories that have shaped our world, and share this video to inspire new minds.